All right, hello everyone, and welcome to the Introduction to SPSS video. So our teaching assistant for this session is called Lucky. She's lucky, as in lucky to be alive, because she's constantly doing stupid things that put her life in danger. All right, so let's get started here. First thing we are going to do is open SPSS. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. So wherever it is that you put in SPSS, go ahead and open that up. It will take a while depending on what kind of computer you have because it's quite a big program. So what we're going to do today is we are going to click on this new data set here on the Welcome to Statistics pop-up that you get. And then you can either hit open here at the bottom, or you can just double click that new data set and it will open up that new data set for you. So this is what it looks like. Now, what you'll notice here is that there's two different views within the SPSS data file. So there's either the variable view, which we're seeing here, where for each column, there's a predetermined name already. In the data view, which we can access from down here on the left, now it's each variable that's within each column. So this is where we can enter in raw data. And here in the variable view is where we specify what our data is. Some other things to note are that when you begin, everything is blank and empty, and you need to start entering things. And the great thing about SPSS is that you can actually import any kind of file practically into SPSS. So it could be Excel or CVS or just text data or data from other types of data management software, and SPSS can read it and then interpret it and make it fit its system. The other important thing to know is that if you're using a Mac or any kind of Apple device, SPSS can have a tendency to freeze. So make sure you save often if you're working on a Mac. I mean, obviously save often any kind of technology you're using, but especially with a Mac because it tends to freeze right when you want to save your final output, and then you're at risk of losing everything you've worked on. All right, so what we're going to do today is enter in some data to show you how SPSS works. If you open up this week's SPSS exercise, you will see that I have provided you with a table of data with 4 different variables. The first one is participant ID, then current statistics knowledge, which is the percentage grade people scored on a statistical test. Current stress levels, which is on the Likert item with 4 options of not stressed, slightly stressed, somewhat stressed, and very stressed. And lastly, whether or not the individual has taken a prior statistics course. So let's start by creating some of these variables in SPSS. If we go back to that variable view, we can start by entering in the name for our first variable. There's some rules, however, to the type of name we use. For one thing, the name must start with a letter. It cannot start with a number, and there can't be any spaces in the variable name. So for participant ID, we can put participant and then either underscore ID, or we can just make it participant ID as one word. If we had tried to put in that space, then we would get this error message that the variable name contains an illegal character. So that's one of the big rules, that the name of a variable is usually a shortened, no space, must start with a letter version of what the actual variable is. So let's put participant ID in there again. and the rest of it auto-populates. Now, the important thing is that these are just SPSS's best guess as to what you're going to do next. So the second column, called type, it's telling us that it thinks you're going to put in a numeric variable. If you click in the right-hand corner of this cell, you'll get these three little dots pop up, which will bring you to this pop-up. So here you can specify what kind of variable it is. You can, for instance, have, a date or currency, or string is what SPSS calls anything that has letters in it or words. But for now, we're going to stick with numeric because, as we can see from our table of data, the participant ID codes only use numbers. All right, so we can cancel out of that. The width is in relation to the size of the column that will hold the participant ID information. And then the decimals is automatically set to 2. However, as we can see from, again, our data file, everything is to the nearest unit. There's no decimals used at all. So to make things easier to interpret, we'll just click again on the right-hand side of the cell, and we can get that down to 0. This next column is the most important, and you can make it bigger so you can see more of it. The label is the actual variable name. So you can have spaces here, you can have numbers, etc. To make this short name that you created for your variable easier to understand. So with participant ID, it's still pretty simple, participant ID, number, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. It's just to remind yourself, what does that variable actually mean? The next column is values. Now, values is, as we talked about in that first lecture video, it is the numbers we assign to categorical variables, such as nominal and ordinal data. So if we go back to our data set here, we can see that for current stress levels, we're using an ordinal variable. It's ordinal because these categories have an order to them. So in this situation, we need to define for SPSS what that order is and what each category represents. So we'll deal with that when we get to that variable. With participant ID number, there are no values to enter, so we will leave that be. Missing, this is where, again, if you click on the very right-hand side of the cell, it gives you options. In most data sets, missing information can be entered in as a discrete missing value. So for instance, if people skip the question because they did not apply to them, you don't want to include that information in your analysis. You want to make sure it's being excluded and not interpreted as, a valid option. This is where you would enter in whatever code you assign to missing values, and it can be anything that's out of the range of your actual variable. So some people do things like -99, because that's usually an impossible value for most things, but we're not going to deal with this because just for today only, our data set does not have any missing information, so we'll cancel out of that. The rest of these are just, again, the formatting, so they're going to be left as they are. The next important one is here, measure. So this is where we have to specify the level of measurement. Again, if you click on the right-hand side of the cell, you'll get some options here. SPSS has divided our 4 levels of measurement, nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, into 3 categories. So they've combined interval and ratio into what they call scale. So nominal, ordinal, and scale are our options. Now, participant ID is technically numbers, but these are numbers assigned to participants, so they don't actually have any kind of meaning. And technically, they don't have an order either, so they're just nominal. It's just a randomly assigned number to people who took our statistics test, so nominal. All right, let's enter in our next variable, which is current statistics knowledge, percentage grade on a statistics test. So we could call this variable stats test, for instance. Again, we know it's numeric. We're going to remove these decimal points because our data doesn't have decimal points, and it will just make things look cluttered if we keep it. And here we can enter in a longer label that makes more sense than just stats test. So percentage score on a statistics test. Current statistics knowledge. The awesome thing about this label is you can make it as long as you want. Again, we're not going to have any values because this is a ratio level of variable, and this does not apply. So we're going to go here to the level of measurement column, and we're going to label it as scale, because that's what SPSS calls every interval or ratio variable. Our third variable is current stress levels. All right, let's put that in here. We'll just call it stress. Again, we'll get rid of these decimals. Current stress levels. Now we actually do have values we need to enter. So if you click again on the right-hand side of this cell, you're going to get those three little dots, which will give you this pop-up. And this is where you can add values and their labels. Let's go back to our data set for a second. So we have 4 options for our Likert item: not stressed, slightly stressed, somewhat stressed, and very stressed. SPSS can't read qualitative information when it's entered in as words. It has to be entered in as numbers. So let's call not stressed 0, slightly stressed 1, somewhat stressed 2, and very stressed 3. So when we give SPSS a 0, what that means is not stressed. And then we add another one. When we give it a 1, that means slightly stressed. Click plus again for the next value, which is 2, somewhat stressed, and plus again for the last one, 3, very stressed. All right, if you screw up and you need to remove something, just hit this delete button and it'll get rid of it for you. So we'll put that back, 3, very stressed. Then we hit OK, and OK puts that in here for us. So now we know what each of the numbers means. And for the level of measurement, we're going to specify that it's ordinal, right? Because those numbers, they have an order, and mixing them up will not make sense. All right, and then lastly, we've got prior statistics scores as no and yes. Usually when you're doing value labels for no and yes, no is 0 and yes is 1. So prior stats class, again, get rid of those decimal points. Participant has prior statistics, has taken prior statistics class. I guess it's better grammar. Values, we're going to add some with this plus. So 0 is going to mean no, plus again, and 1 is going to mean yes. We're going to hit OK. And now for the level of measurement, it is nominal, okay? Because we could also mix it around. We could make yes be 0 and no be 1, and it'll still work the same way. Just, no usually means none, nothing. So that's why it's usually assigned 0, just, a logic thing. All right, we have now specified our 4 variables. If we go to data view, we can now see them right here, and we can start entering our data. So if we go back to our data file, we should be able to copy over this first column and paste it right in here. Paste it right in here, I said. Paste it, damn it. Paste. All right. Next up, we've got our stats test. You'll notice it didn't copy these zeros in front of the number, which is fine because the participants still have their own individual ID that separates them. Let's do current statistics knowledge, Control C. And so right click, paste. Now we can't paste over the stress variables because in our data set, the word file, it is written as names. So we're gonna have to write them out by hand. So if you'll remember, very stressed is that 3, somewhat stressed is 1, not stressed is 0. Wait, no, whoops, somewhat stressed was 2, my bad. Slightly stressed is 1, somewhat stressed. Participant 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, not stressed again. 1, 0. And this is how data entry mistakes happen when you lose track of where you are with your participant list. Okay, not stressed. Then we've got a couple of very stressed people. Somewhat stressed person, slightly stressed person. And there we go, that's in. Then we're going to go look at our prior statistics class. 0, 1 for yes, 1 for yes, 1 for yes, 0 for no, 0 for no, 1 for yes, 0, 0, yes, yes, 0, 0, yes, yes. All right, our data is in. Okay, so one fun thing that SPSS can do for us is it can make these numbers read what they actually are. So if you hit this button right here, the one that has an 8 and a 1, it will actually change the view. So now we're seeing our actual value labels that we entered into variable view instead of the numbers that we gave each label. And we can change it back as well. All right, so now what we're going to do that's very important is we're going to save our SPSS file, and we're going to make sure we know where we have saved it. So find a folder that you know where it's located so you don't lose it. No, not custom office templates. Where is this class? There's the class. So we will call it SPSS Exercise 1, and we're going to save it. And when we hit save, the save icon disappears. So we know it worked because now we haven't made any changes, so there's no need to resave. Now, in the future, we're going to look at what all of these options up here are. But for today, we're just going to focus on the simple ones that we learned in class. So in order to create some frequency distributions for these variables, remember that data reduction strategy, we're going to go to Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and then Frequencies. All right. And this little pop-up shows us all the variables we have available. And it asks us to select which ones do we want to create a frequency distribution for. So what we're going to do is we're going to move them all over because our weekly SPSS assignment asks us to provide a frequency table for each one of these variables. Now, you can see here that it's got this create APA style tables option as well. Don't use it. I do not want to see any SPSS tables in your final assignment, because as you're going to see in a second, SPSS tables have a lot of redundant information that is not useful and that we do not want to see. All right, we do want to make sure it's checked. Is this display frequency tables? It's automatic, so don't uncheck it. And then there's some options here on the right. This first one, statistics, we'll learn more about next week. This is where we can ask for things like the mean and the median, etc. We're not going to do those this week. There's also an option for charts. So we can ask for bar charts, pie charts, or histograms, and it will do this for all of the variables that we have selected in here. But as we learned in the lecture video, the first one, since this is a mix of continuous and discrete data, we don't have a chart that's appropriate for all of them. So either we can run them one at a time, or we can use a different part of the program to create the appropriate chart. Let's just try running one so that you can see some of the charts that are provided. So a histogram is what we use when we have continuous variable that's interval or ratio level of measurement, like the percentage score on a stats test. And we can also ask for the normal curve on the histogram. So you're going to learn next week what a normal curve is and what it does, but you can at least see what it looks like today. And we're going to hit continue. Format, style, and bootstrap, you do not need to worry about. That's just extra very, very complicated things that you don't need to remember. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit paste. Do not hit OK, hit paste. What paste does when you click on it is it brings up the code that SPSS uses in order to run any kind of command. So this is SPSS language, basically. It opens up in what is known as a SPSS syntax editor. So once you're a pro and you know what you're doing, you can just write out the code instead of doing all the point and clicks. But I personally like the point and click. Now, to make this run, all you have to do is highlight it and hit this giant green triangle, which is run. So we're going to hit that, and a third window pops up. This is the output window. So with SPSS, we're always going to be working with three windows: data window, syntax window, output window. The output window is what gives us our results for any test that we run. So the first table of the frequency output shows us how many valid items are in our sample and how many have missing information. Go away. And then the next table shows us how our data is distributed. Now, the great thing about a frequency table is it can help us with some data cleaning. If we look at our frequencies here, we can see that we have a person who scored 105, right? And we know that this is percentage score on a statistics test. So that's what's known as a data error. And this is the kind of thing we want to fix by deleting that person's information if we can't find, the original copy of their test to find out the actual number that should have gone in there. You always need to fix data errors before you can go on with any analyses. So this is that histogram that we get from our data. And you can see the normal curve on top. So let's quickly go back to our data file and find that 105. There it is. It's not valid, so we're just going to delete that out of the data set. To show that there's nothing in the cell, SPSS puts in a little dot. And now let's try running that exact same syntax again. So go back to your syntax file highlight it, and run it. And now when it runs, we've got 14 cases that are valid and 1 that's missing, which is exactly as it should be. And now we can see that that 105 is no longer in our frequency table or within our histogram. And then we've also got percentage. So this is the absolute frequency, if you'll remember. And then this percentage gives you the percentage including the missing value, while the valid percentage gives you the percentage out of just those 14 people for whom we have valid information. And then over here, we've got the cumulative percentage. All right, let's do some of our categorical variables now. So you can click Analyze from the output window as well as from the data window. It brings you to the exact same place. Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and then Frequencies. And click. We're going to kick out this percentage score. We've already done that one. We don't need to do it again. Let's do current stress levels and whether or not participant has taken a stats course before. And this time, let's ask for bar charts because histograms are not appropriate. And you can now see what the difference is between the histogram and the bar chart. And again, you're going to hit paste. And then you're going to have to find your syntax window. And here it is. We're going to highlight this new command. And we're going to hit play or run. And here it is. So here's our 2 variables. They're both in this valid/missing chart. And we can see we've got 15 valid numbers. And here's how the frequencies are broken down for each variable. About 20% are not stressed, and a third are slightly stressed, etc. And here, slightly more than half of our sample has taken a prior statistics class. And then we've got our bar charts here, and we can make this bigger to see the entire thing as well as here. So what you'll notice is that the space between the bars in the bar chart is much, much bigger than the space between bars in the histogram. In fact, in the space between bars and histogram should be even less than that. It should be touching, but in the last SPSS updates, they screwed up and made their histograms look like this, which is very disappointing because it goes against the rules. And statisticians love their rules. All right. So basically, now we have everything we need in order to submit our SPSS exercise 1. We've created the frequency tables for all the variables, and we've created an appropriate graph for each of the variables. We want to make sure we save our output files. So output files are separate. It must be saved separately from the data files and the syntax files. So make sure you know where you're saving it so you can find it later. Call this one output SPSS exercise 1 and save. I'm going to want to save my syntax file too in case I need to rerun something at a later time. Syntax SPSS exercise 1 and save.